Happy Feet 2. I was hoping for this film to be like an improved version of the original with even more spectacular dance scenes. This is not what happened. Not only that they took out the dancing scenes, which is what makes the first one good, but they also gave us a plot that they took from other animated films, even from the first Happy Feet, and make it less interesting. They also turned the characters into a group of generics, adding in even more generic characters, and bombarding us with filler that has no point to the story and oftentimes would go unfinished. The biggest example of that is the one with the two confused krill that take almost half of the movie. It's either they are a horribly failed attempt to make the next Scrat from Ice Age, or the writers are just too tired of writing about Mumble the Worrying Dad and the three kids. The only thing that's good about it is the animation. Sometimes it can look really nice, and it can take us for a ride, but without those dancing scenes, it's just... what's the point? It pretty much results to the most disappointing animated film of 2011. Smurfs The Lost Village. When it comes to this reboot, it gave audiences some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that it's still not a good film. The problem with this movie is that it plays a little too safe and sticks with the generically harmless tropes that you'd normally find in any other kids flick. As a result, the film ends up with a cast of one-dimensional characters, childish humor, and a simple story that feels more like an episode of the Hanna-Barbera series stretched out to 90 minutes. The good news, however, is that not only is this an improvement from the live-action animation hybrids, but it's also the best Sony animation film in a long time. To its credit, it does deliver some nice animation that stays true to the original Peyo style, and the way that the Forbidden Forest is crafted is like a vibrantly colorful environment with many different creative plants and creatures. Overall, it's only a slight upgrade from the previous films. Sure, they're no longer unbearable pieces of garbage that only wants to be cool, but now it's just a forgettably generic animated movie that panders more to kids. It's better, but Sony still smurfed up this movie bad.
Well, alright.
The Lorax. What people may remember to be the biggest marketing of the year, The Lorax is definitely not the best movie that came out from the pages of Dr. Seuss. Or just good in general. The biggest problem with The Lorax is that because they can't stretch a children's book for 90 minutes long, they added in a lot of random plot lines and characters that end up being not only pointless, but also mediocre, stupid, and confusing. Or even just copying materials from their previous films just to get a cheap laugh. And that's not counting all the bad pop culture references. But the movie is not all that terrible. What's originally from the book, like its plot and the characters, like the Lorax and the Onceler, are well developed and where the emotions are strong. Not only that, but the animation is pretty good, giving us something very colorful and highly respecting the Dr. Seuss style. Now, I would have been a little nicer to the film and maybe put it a little lower on the worst list if it weren't for those terrible musical numbers. Each and every one of them are just stupid attempts of a modern pop song or even a rap song, and they make a Justin Bieber album sound tolerable. I think it's this that explains best how I feel when they start singing. Unless there was someone during production who cared an awful lot, this movie isn't going to get better. It's not. Oh, and before we continue, what's with this stupid obsession on DeviantArt with the Onceler? Smallfoot. This would have to be the most prominent example of animated mediocrity. Even with the cute concept of turning the idea of legends upside down, where a group of Yetis questioned the existence of humans, it's the movie's complete unoriginality that ultimately made this forgettably bland. The story is dull and very predictable, the characters consist of nothing but generic archetypes, the musical numbers feel like they were slapped in at the last minute where there's no need for this to be a musical, and even the animation feels uncreative. Hey, look, it wants to be cartoony with a bunch of slapstick gags, you know, just like most poorly made mainstream animated films we've recently gotten. But admittedly, I shouldn't go hard on it too much. Despite its lack of creativity, there are a few good things to note about this feature. The message of being open-minded to the world around you is very bold and ambitious for an animated film to pull off. The song Wonderful Life is strong and well made, and even if people just say it as a fun little meme, Zendaya does give a great performance as Michi. The movie is not completely worthless, it does have some substance to it, but for the most part, this Yeti is just a mythological mediocrity.
Wait! Ah, he's gone.
Home. Standing as DreamWorks' only contender this year, this ended up becoming one of their weaker films. In a strange twist, DreamWorks decided to make a movie that was meant for a much younger audience, resulting it with pretty bad writing that consists of an easily predictable and generic story, one-dimensional characters, very low-brow and juvenile humor, and a message of friendship and making mistakes is okay that feels very forced upon the audience. Even the voiceover work just feels all over the place, with Rihanna underacting and Jim Parsons overacting. What keeps it away from being in the levels of Shark Tale bad though, is that at least the animation is very well done. It's colorful, creative, the simplicity of the designs complement the film's kid-friendly tone, and the chase scenes do make it a bit engaging. That, and you can tell that the heart is in the right place. Like, it shows that DreamWorks didn't make this to cash in on little kids. The filmmakers just want to make something that would be enjoyable for them, while also giving them a nice little lesson. It's not the most hateable movie they've made, but considering that this is from DreamWorks, it's obvious that they can do much better than what they did with The Booth.
Can I come into that out now?
No.
But I can. You are just having to take away the piece of wood.
Spies in Disguise, a tiresome Emperor's New Groove ripoff packed with some cool spy action. Trolls. Imagine a troll in Central Park. Now imagine if you take that film and put it in a nightclub surrounded by blacklight. That is exactly what you get with Trolls. The biggest issue with the film is the complete lack of focus on the writing. There is no care put onto either the story or the characters, and instead would rather emphasize this utterly ridiculous tone that's trying way too hard to be happy and look cool to the kids by implementing numerous of well-known songs and remix them into bland pop tunes. Not to mention that the cast of characters are just a bunch of sellouts. And by that, I mean instead of having any form of personality, they only exist in order to sell merchandising. However, even though it is one of DreamWorks' weaker films, it doesn't mean that it can't offer something good. To its credit, for what it's trying to do, it is some of the most creative animation crafted this year. It's highly colorful, the textures perfectly capture the scrapbook feeling, and the way that the animators both design and animate the trolls themselves is great. Unfortunately though, the animation alone is not enough to make this passable, and it only resulted into the DreamWorks version of the Smurfs.
Solid burn, Branch.
Planes. Fire and Rescue. The most shocking thing about this film when it was released was that it was out in theaters in less than a year after the original. But when you get that fact out of the way, this movie only proves that the Planes films should have stayed as direct-to-DVD features. Fire and Rescue barely offers anything to its audience with a dull story and uninteresting characters, making the movie easily forgettable at best. However, when you compare it to the first Planes, it's technically an improvement. I mean, the structure of the story is much better, the animation is pretty good for what it is, and at least there aren't as much annoying stereotypes here. But again, that's just comparing it to its predecessor. As it is, Planes Fire and Rescue is still an obvious cash-in to the Cars franchise meant more for the merchandising than the movie itself. But admittedly, the best thing you could say about it is that it's better? Turbo. I don't think there's anywhere for DreamWorks to hide the fact that with this film, they just want to make their own version of Cars. Imagine if you take the entire concept of the Pixar movie, add the plot of Ratatouille, and replace some characters with snails, then you essentially get Turbo. Now, I'm not saying that all of it is pretty bad. What it did with the animation is well made, giving both the point of view of the people and the snails, along with some good racing scenes. That, and some say despite the bad writing, you have to be on the right mindset in order to enjoy it. Sure, it's dumb, but it's enjoyably dumb. Yeah, well, I'd love to, but I can't, because of how obvious of a cash grabber it wants to be. It shows that the people at DreamWorks want to replace Lightning McQueen with Theo, along with the comparisons to this and Cars. That and the many different ads for Verizon don't help either. This is easily the kind of film that would have a nice spot on my worst list, but after what I've been through in 2013, it could have been much worse. Just consider Turbo lucky that this snail is fast enough to get itself here. Cars 2. It's really sad that this is the first time I'm making a countdown video like this, and Pixar ends up being on the worst list. The problems with Cars 2 are that the story is nothing but a very generic spy story that we have heard of plenty of times, but now it's starring everyone's favorite tow truck, Mater. And also, there are characters that are way too underdeveloped. They don't give us time to know the new ones a little more, or know something new about the old ones. They just turn out to be mostly one-dimensional. But the biggest flaw it has is the target audience. Kids, and kids only. Normally, that wouldn't be a big problem if it were someone like Blue Sky, and this movie does have a special place in John Lasseter's heart. But come on! This is Pixar, the most acclaimed animation studio in the world. You can't go directly from this to this. But, on the other hand, at least the animation does look great. Like I said, this is Pixar. Comparing to the first film, well, if you like the first one, then you'll like this too. But personally, I find that there isn't as much of the charm and heartwarming moments from the original. As a film by itself, it's a kids movie that's meh. But as a Pixar film, it's a huge disappointment.